Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of JLXP. This one to talk about week 3 of playoffs, the second to last week of playoffs before we have finals weekend. And since the LCS switched to this playoff format, it has been, I think, the most dynamic and interesting weekend that you have in the whole system, because essentially what happens here is you have the 4 teams that are still in the losers bracket play Thursday, Friday. 2 of them are just straight up eliminated, don't move on, don't go to Worlds. The 2 winners then play this ridiculously high stress game on Sunday to see who goes to Worlds and whose year is over. And then, weirdly enough, the winners bracket final holds the least amount of intensity for me here, because even though it's a good exhibition of the 2 best teams through the playoffs so far, I don't really feel like it means anything in terms of who's actually going to win the split. Because I went back and checked. So we've had this playoff format since 2020 summer split. That was the year TSM made that miracle run. FlyQuest was actually the winner of the upper bracket finals. They lost in finals. The only time the winner of the upper bracket finals out of 4 times in NA actually won the split was 2021 Spring C9. And man, that was the Santorin migraine year. And they were down 2-1 in the finals. So very close to being 4 for 4, having the winner of the LCS actually come from the losers bracket. There's something about the momentum you can create on the Saturday, I feel like, before the Sunday of finals. But we'll get into that when I do the podcast getting into the final week. To talk about the article a little bit this week, I cheesed the stats to get 11 thoughts. I'd gotten a little bit of grief from some people for like 4 thoughts when I was just doing thoughts on the 4 matchups. So I cheesed it. I have 11 thoughts. The first thought was a prelude about juicing the stats and what I just mentioned about the summer finals. But also the fact that North America is hosting Worlds this year increases the importance of this year for North American orgs. And this is something that has been going back 2 years in terms of their ability to fundraise, their ability to convince sponsors, why it is worth it for them to invest so heavily in their teams. Because when Worlds comes to North America, for the first time since 2016, there's going to be this massively high exposure event that's finally in a time slot for North America. Like, it's actually a really big deal being able to watch Worlds live. Something North American fans haven't been able to do unless they stay up to ungodly hours for the last 6+ years. But with that, 4 organizations basically said, we have to make Worlds. And that is what is at stake this week for specifically TL and EG. I feel like if COG makes Worlds, it's like a bonus, or if TSM makes Worlds, it's like, I don't know, winning the lottery. So it's going to be a massive, massive relief if one of those teams ends up winning 2 best of 5s in qualifying, and it will be a catastrophic event if Team Liquid or EG miss. And I'll get into that when I talk about the individual teams, but it's specifically because the World Championship is in North America, and that is what these teams have been selling so they can sign the rosters that they signed. Everyone knows that TL has this massively expensive roster. Not everyone realizes that EG also has a massively expensive roster. Inspired, Impact, and Vulcan weren't cheap. That's for sure. Okay. But I'm going to kind of go team by team. The second thought here was Counter Logic Gaming. So I think if you went by standard power ranking metrics, they'd have a really low chance of winning the 2 best of 5s this weekend. They have to beat TL first, then very likely EG, because I'm expecting EG to beat TSM in their series. And I'm not really sure which COG is going to show up, because they definitely looked hesitant and probably too conservative against Golden Guardians last week. I think the Yone ban did a lot to limit how dynamic they looked in game, because that being a flex pick, I think makes their draft very difficult to deal with, but also I think it suits the way they like to team fight. And when they finally did at least get a collie for Palafox in game 5, I thought that gave them a completely different look. And I think they were drafting late game team compositions in a lot of that Golden Guardian series, and I really want them to get back to acting like an underdog, and that means, to me, not picking as much scaling and really leaning on the unconventional picks that other people don't consider standard meta. So more Collie, maybe even Dokla Fiora, stuff like that, where they're really going to try, and if contracts can get some of those great first blood looks, have a chance to snowball a few of the games. And listen, they did actually beat Team Liquid in the summer split in one of the matchups. So this is a team that took Cloud9 to 5 games, but then also got taken to 5 games by Golden Guardians. So I'm not really sure who's going to show up. Moving on to Team Liquid, third thought. They're in quite the predicament. They were not only built to win, but really all of the messaging about this team is that they have been built to dominate. Now they have to beat CLG and then likely EG just to guarantee themselves top 3. And one thing I do want to add here that is in the article is I kind of feel like TL themselves have done a disservice to themselves by continually saying how anything but first is an absolute failure, which I can understand why they see it that way when they bring in Bjergsen, Hansama, Bwipo, but it has really robbed them of the small victories that I feel like can keep morale up and can keep a team motivated and happy, because objectively look at what they've accomplished. In Spring Split, they won 14 games. That was like, wasn't 16-2, wasn't the best record they'd ever had. They finished third, which is disappointing, but that was like, oh my God, absolute disaster. What have we ever done? If you heard Bwipo talking about that at the start of summer. Then they start the split with one of the most dominant 3-0s we've seen in summer. Then they go 1-1. Oh, failure. They finished third in summer split. Wow, that was really bad. Oh, now they lost in game 5 to 100 Thieves, the team that has been in finals 2 to 3 consecutive splits, depending on what they do against C9. Oh, that was also awful, right? But like, take those accomplishments and put them on another team. Like even someone like Cloud9, who also has like high expectations, just not expectations that are through the freaking ceiling. Like if C9 was 14-4, finished third, then we're third and still were fighting, like they'd be a little down, but at least there would have been some celebrations during the split, like when they finish spring, if they finish spring at the top of the regular season standings, or when they win a best of 5 against FlyQuest with 3 dominant games, right? So I think it's a little extra how high the expectations have been set for them, and I think that pressure actually hurts them and makes it harder for themselves to succeed, because even the things they do well are not considered good, and I think that has just weighed on them the whole year, and it is something that they have been unable to overcome. So I still think they have the talent. I still think they were extremely close to winning that 100 Thieves series. They're still the best early game team in the LCS, and they still have trouble coming together to team fight like an elite team. So I'm not expecting any of those things to change going into this week, and I think it's going to be really close to see if that level is what gets them to Worlds. I think high chance they beat COG, not guaranteed, and then who the hell knows what's going to happen against DG. All right, fourth thought, TSM. This team still exists. They're still playing League of Legends. That was very unexpected when you go back to, say, week 5 of Summer Split when they were 3-8 and they'd benched half their roster. But in the article, I take the positive yet fairly unlikely view of how could they actually beat EG. It's very unlikely, but the path would be tactical dumpstering Danny and Lane, solo going toe-to-toe with Impact, and Spica the 2021 MVP, just popping off. All three of those things could actually happen, right? Like Tactical, he's played Danny 6 times. Danny is 4-2. But Tactical has been able to stay toe-to-toe with him in team fights. Weirdly enough, Tactical has actually lost lane on average against Danny. Solo all-time, through his FlyQuest days and also being on every team in the league, is 8-11 versus Impact, but has averaged plus 5.6 CS at 15 against him. And Spica has had moments this split where he's looked very good and moments where he's looked very bad. So maybe he'd get some of those positive moments. It's literally only a year ago that he was the MVP. But a couple of disclaimers here. EG is very good, so there's that. And I have heard that the starting AD carry is not going to be Tactical. So I'm not sure what's happening there. Probably just going to wait and see. The rose-tinted glasses here would say they want to have like a different feeling AD carry that Danny has to adjust to mid-series. Like, you know, when you have a guy that throws 80 miles an hour and then you bring in a guy that throws 95, which normally would be hittable, but after looking at 80 miles an hour, it just blows right past you. That's the hope. But my hopes aren't that high. So we're going to go to EG. Fifth thought. Okay. I was very happy that I correctly flip-flopped my prediction on broadcast to be the only person of the 16 on the graphic that said C9 would beat EG. If you remember, on this podcast originally, I did predict EG to win that series 3-2. And in 10 thoughts, I also predicted EG to win. But on the day, I did switch. As I talked about in my previous podcast, I saw that no one else was giving them credit and that there was a very real chance, so I had to take the risk. With that being said, like how fun it was to see C9 win, like I'm kind of sad about it because I think if any team deserves to go to Worlds after what they've accomplished so far in 2022, it is EG. They won Spring. They were spectacular international representatives of North America. They had one of the best MSI group stages ever with 2 rookie-ish players. Danny was not quite a rookie. And even though they did get 3-0'd in the semifinals, I thought they played a competitive style that had a chance of working. And then they were 15-3 in the summer split regular season. And I love the talent development storyline. I love how vocal Peter Dunn is on Twitter. I like Vulcan as a rising personality in the scene. Like, I love so much of what this team is doing. In the older formats, the championship points would maybe give them a bit more forgiveness and maybe they'd get like the second chance in the regional qualifier. The second chance is the losers bracket. That's the remodeled system that we're playing in right now. But honestly, if EG doesn't go to Worlds, I will probably be a little bit sad. A lot sad, because they have been this shining light of hope and a new way of approaching, not entirely new, but a new way of approaching roster building in North American League of Legends. So I really hope they can bounce back from that C9 loss and put up a very strong showing this weekend. So how do they actually bounce back from that loss? There's a lot of different ways they can react here, because going back through the series, if I look at their first 3 bans in all 4 games, 11 of the 12 bans were bot lane focused. Combine that with the fairly emotional post-game interview from Inspired, where he's clearly just speaking whatever's coming to his mind first. I really don't want to blame him too much for what he said, but we're going to use the information for content. How he said their champion pools made them really inflexible in draft. So the champions they were banning, Kalista, Yumi Lulu in some of the games, Sivir in some of the games, never actually banned Draven, but that would be a threat if Tactical comes in. Those are the lane dominant early game carry champions, Draven, Lucian, Kalista, that Danny has never really had a preference for. I don't think they necessarily suit his strengths. He's not a lane dominant player. He's very, very good at getting gold. And then once he gets gold, he's amazing in team fights. Whereas Lucian, Callista, and Draven have to be very active on the map as opposed to passive on the map like Danny likes to be. They have to get their gold from basically taking turrets in people's faces rather than taking turrets while the rest of your team is distracting them. So I can see EG trying the hard pivot of you just have to play Callista. Like you just have to be able to play Lucian Nami. That's the way to succeed. Trying to do that this weekend and losing. I can really see that. What I hope they do is they just keep doing what got them here. Funnel gold onto Danny on hypercarries. I think he's good enough. Him and Vulcan are good enough to not get slammed by Lucian or Draven. I think you ban Callista like everybody else is doing, and you go from there. I think that's the way that they're going to win because that's what got them here. Inspired and JoJo need to play well as well. That was another factor of them losing that series is Inspired and JoJo were not creating their normal amount of mid-jungle pressure, and that wasn't allowing the team to buy Danny space to get gold. Danny was getting pulled around the map because they needed him, whereas in so many other games, they literally did not need him, so he could just get gold until he arrived in teamfights to carry. So it's going to be scary and fascinating how they respond to that loss, because when you were so good for so long, 15-3, only losing 3 games, all split, then losing 3 games within 4 in that series, you can have some very strong reactions because that's the like lose to improve sort of thing. When you really do lose, it makes you reevaluate things, and I don't know what conclusions they're going to come to. So we'll have to see. I want them to win. All right, 6th thought, 100 Thieves. Listen, the hardest thing about being in the winner's bracket final is keeping your focus up. And I believe, based on some old data of when I asked who he thought would win against Team Liquid and C9, and he immediately said TL, that like 100 Thieves did at least see Team Liquid as significantly stronger opponents compared to C9. I don't know how much that perception would change, even after watching the EG series. They're probably on top of the world after beating TL right now and qualifying for Worlds. And also knowing that even if they lose, they're still going to Chicago. They're still playing best of 5s to try and win the title. So, knowing this team, I think there's a pretty big risk that they relax a bit and coast a bit against Cloud9. You don't want them to, but I think there's definitely a risk that that could happen. But I do want to take a step back and appreciate what this team has done. 2021 Summer Champs, 2022 second place, and now guaranteed top 3, going to Chicago and going to Worlds. That kind of sustained success is hard. Sticking with the same 5 players, even though some people would say that is lazy, was a very good decision and is hard to do. To be able to play League of Legends with the same people and pretty much the same coaching staff for the last 3 splits. And they've always left something in the tank for that final push. They haven't had dominant regular seasons. The first half has been poor. The second half has consistently been better. The playoffs have been very good. I hope they don't let up versus Cloud9. They won the winner's bracket final last split. They should win it again and then just be more ready. Winning 1 best of 5 should be easier than winning 2 best of 5s on finals weekend, even if the stats have shown otherwise. And one side plot here I mentioned in the last podcast, but the reason that a lot of the league doesn't give them respect is because they lose a lot in scrims. So that just gets imprinted in your brain that that's how good these players in that team is, but they have the largest difference from their scrim performance to their stage performance of any team in the LCS. So that has a little bit to do with their gap in perception. All right, 7th thought. No team is happier right now than Cloud9. Because for the entire split, they felt like they were on the outside looking in to Worlds qualification as the 4th best team. There was just so much significance in what happened during their win versus EG that I'm going to restate some things here. Sven, I somehow didn't mention this at all. Sven used to lane with Vulcan. There was drama. Vulcan went to a different team. Sven role swapped 3 months ago, and then Sven beat his old lane opponent to qualify for Worlds. Jensen who TL replaced with Bjergsen, who did not play Pro League of Legends in spring, qualified for his eighth consecutive world championship. That's crazy. Fudge also is in his third Worlds as a top laner after dabbling in mid. And if you missed it, Blabber killed a lot of scuttle crabs. It was a little bit of a meme, but he played well and really outplayed Inspired. So he's always going to be a threat and had such a good series, and that's not even talking about Berserker. But really, at this point, I feel like C9 is playing with house money, if you know what that term is. So, like, despite beating EG this past weekend, I don't really think people expect them to go on and win the split. So that actually kind of helps them play more free. They've accomplished their goal, so to speak, or at least they've accomplished what was originally expected of them. Very few people at the start of the split or at any point in this split were like, yeah, C9, they're going to be the ones that win it all. It's been this whole conversation about TLEG 100 Thieves. C9 catapults themselves in here, but they got a real chance with the way they played. So this is where I really cheese 10 thoughts. 8th thought, 9th thought, 10th thought, 11th thought is just series predictions. I reserve the right to switch these around if new information comes to light from talking to people or hearing what scrims are going on. But to no one's surprise, TL versus CLG, I am predicting TL 3-1. EG versus TSM, I'm also going to predict EG 3-1. I do think TSM can get a game off them. I'm going to predict C9 against 100 Thieves. I'm expecting C9 to play really free and 100 Thieves to have a little bit of a letdown. So C9 3-2. And then, dude, I do not know who is going to win TL versus EG. I don't even think I'm on broadcast that day. I might just not make a prediction. I'm too nervous. It's too nuts. I will eventually make a prediction, but not now. It hasn't been done yet. I haven't done enough research. I need to see the way they play in their best of fives. They have to play 2 best of fives within a 4 or 3 day span. It is nuts. That Sunday game might be more important than finals. I mean it. It might actually be the most important NA game of the year. So much at stake. That's all I got. That was 11 thoughts. Thank you once again for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, all that jazz. And I'll see you next time.